Hello and welcome to the 8th video in a series of videos on systems thinking. My name is Bhaskaran and I'm the faculty walking you through this series. In our last video, we started looking at how to develop the skills required of a systems thinker. And we started looking at the various levels of skill, actually starting from ignorance all the way up to guru. And we also looked at the viable systems model as a first step towards this process, where the 5 levels of the viable systems model were discussed in the last video. In this video, we're going to go a little further and look at the characteristics, the traits of a systems thinker. Somebody who is proficient in systems thinking, how does he or she become so good at it? We are also going to talk about how to develop those traits. Right? So what are those traits and how to develop them? The following sequence helps you understand the kind of overall architecture of this video in the sense of the various facets of a systems thinker. First thing is that a systems thinker must learn to embrace curiosity. Exceedingly important that this person understands the larger picture, the bigger world. The second one is, how can you seek clarity? If you're a good systems thinker, you must become clear, gain clarity on the situation under discussion. The third piece of this puzzle is how to be gracious, to understand that you yourself are part of the system and could be contributing towards the situation that we see today. The fourth piece is to look for options. There is rarely the first solution being the ideal solution. So how can you look at various options before deciding on what is the optimum solution for a given situation? And the fifth piece is about exhibiting courage. Why is this important? Because in a complex system, and you do systems thinking only when the situation is complex, in a complex situation, any decision you take is fraught with risks. And despite your best effort, it could go the wrong way. So you do need the courage to be able to stand up and say, look, I believe in my decision and I would like to take it forward. The last trait of a good system thinker is to bank on experience of other people. To look up to your seniors and ask them if they have faced a similar situation, to pick their brains to understand and help you resolve the situation. So let's look at each of these one by one. Let's start with embracing curiosity. How do you develop this? How does one become more curious? The first aspect of this is that you need to learn to learn. And that's easier said than done. In our schooling system, in our education system, by and large, we are taught what to learn. Very rarely does somebody teach us how to learn. Now, why is this such an important trait? Remember that in today's world, the environment is changing so dynamically, so rapidly, and the environment is so complex that it is virtually impossible for anybody to teach you on a day-to-day basis. It becomes your responsibility to understand this world yourself. Therefore, learning to learn is that much more important. Now, where does this come from? Number one, the ability to read on your own and to understand what you read. So it's no longer enough just to read a magazine or a newspaper or a couple of articles. One must invest significant time on a daily, ongoing basis to keep up to date with any field of knowledge that you're involved with. So reading and understanding what one reads, building that ability is perhaps the most important trait in learning to learn. And fortunately for us today, there are so many avenues available that make this so easy. Now, whether it's online, whether it is from textbooks, whether it's from professional magazines, whether it's from attending seminars, forums, or even better, writing your own papers and talking at conferences, very many ways to learn. And one of the most effective that I have personally seen is actually teaching the subject to somebody else. When you do that teaching, you learn a lot more than you realize. Remember, learning to learn, super important. This, in addition to just teaching you the depth of what you know, also helps you build that breadth of knowledge that's so important as a system thinker. So do not only focus on learning about your subject and your domain, about your technology, about your application. try and understand everything there is to know around it as well, the adjacent areas of knowledge that are important for you. You also need to understand the big picture. It's important to, of course, understand the details of any situation. Of course, it is important. But remember, we spoke about systems thinking being the ability to talk about the interactions between the subsystems. So if you're focused on just one or two subsystems, you would fail to see the interactions amongst all the other subsystems that exist out there. So learning to see the big picture is extremely important for a system thinker, to be able to connect these dots. How do you do this? One way would be to look for a role model, somebody that you think is a big picture thinker. Understand how they behave, understand how they speak, understand what kind of information they share. Where do they get this information from? How do they connect those dots? Talk to such people. Role models are an excellent way of learning to think the big picture. The second one is a little more subtle. Look towards your boss rather than your subordinate when you're thinking about understanding the big picture. Why is this important? The more junior you are in an organization, obviously the more depth you are expected to have in a specific area. But the more depth you have, the less narrow your area of knowledge will be. Whereas with your boss and his boss and further up, they're expected to have breadth of knowledge rather than depth. So try and understand the way your boss thinks about this, or whether the way his or her boss thinks about a situation, and see where they are coming from. The third piece is avoid looking at details. While details are important, they must be understood, they are super, it can be almost seductive to continuously go into the depth of a topic. You must learn to back off a little bit, to look at the forest, not only at the trees. Also, if necessary, we spoke about this concept of the boundary of a system. If you think you're not getting a fairly decent picture because you've constrained the system by defining a narrow boundary, try and expand the boundary, move beyond this. And if you expanded the boundary, possibly you would get a bigger picture of the situation, and that could lead to a more optimum solution. Last but not least, I think you must always think about situation, events or circumstances at one level higher. So what do I mean by this? So for example, if you look at a car and you say, you know what, the brakes are not as effective as I would like them to be, then move away from just looking at the braking system. Look at the total weight of the car, look at the speed at which the car is going, think about the incline of the road at which the car is traveling, look at how many additional passengers are seated in the car, what's the cargo space, how much load is the cargo space going to hold, things like this. Moving away from just the braking systems, because all these other parameters can also impact braking efficiency. What else should you be looking at? You should also learn to look for patterns and trends. Remember, patterns come not only from what you see today, but patterns are emerging from history. They are coming to you from the past. So try to understand a situation over a longer period of time. Similarly, patterns are also emerging from geographically spread locations. Things that happened at a different space, different point of space, can also impact what the situation looks like to you today here in your current location. Additionally, whenever you make an assumption, because when the human mind is amazing at discerning patterns out of chaos, but if you're making an assumption about a situation, talk about it, speak to your colleagues about it, and say, look, I'm not very sure, but I assume that this is the pattern that one must look at. The fact that you have called out an assumption allows you to look for alternatives, and that must be very important. That concept of looking for alternatives is very important when you're doing systems thinking. The last piece to looking at patterns is look at patterns across multiple subsystems, not only within the subsystem that you're currently responsible for or looking at. Patterns are easier to look for when you're talking about multiple subsystems. Next piece of this puzzle is looking for cause-effect relationships. Again, look at all possible combinations. We looked at the braking system, that we spoke about the number of passengers in the car, we spoke about the power of the engine, we spoke about the boot space, how much luggage can you hold, because the heavier the vehicle, the longer the braking distance. Look at the size of the discs that are used to create those braking systems. How much pneumatic pressure is applied on this? Look at all possible cause-effect relationships when you're studying a system. The important thing here is to do the brainstorming up front. Don't eliminate a possible cause-effect relationship till it has been studied in toto. So look at all possible combinations, then start filtering. You need to look beyond obvious connections. I'll give you a beautiful story of this. If as a human being, we spoke about the human body being a system. And many of us use cooling glasses, right? So we use the dark glasses when we are out there in the sun. Now, one of the servo mechanisms, one of the cybernetic features that the human body has is that it takes cognizance of the ambient light through the eyes and automatically darkens the skin. It tans the skin a little bit. The reason that the human body does this is to prevent skin allergies because of bright sunlight, and worst case, to prevent skin cancer. But the moment you put on these dark glasses, the brain is fooled into thinking that it's not very bright out there, and the brain therefore does not instruct the skin to darken the pigments, to form that tanned layer. And this can lead to other complications. Therefore, look beyond obvious connections, look at things that you didn't usually think of, and see if you can find a cause-effect relationship. Also look for unintended consequences. If you were doing A and you expected B to happen, could it also lead to C, D, and E? And if it did, then those consequences must also be taken care of when you think about the system holistically. So looking for unintended consequences, looking for cause-effect relationships, these are very important traits and skills that a systems thinker must look at. In summary, what we spoke of in this unit was some more techniques to develop systems thinking, specifically how to embrace curiosity. We spoke about learning to learn, we spoke about looking at the big picture, we spoke about patterns and trends, we spoke about cause-effect relationships, and of course about unintended consequences. In subsequent videos, we're going to be looking at other traits that a systems thinker must develop. Remember, any skill comes with practice. Please, please, please start putting these thoughts to practice in your day-to-day work. Thank you very much.